Joining me right now is Indiana Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. She's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being here. Your reaction to what you just heard from the CEO of TikTok.
Well, listen, the CEO got cut line a few times, but I think, we need to understand we have a serious national security risk. We have over 100 million Americans involved with TikTok, and TikTok is owned by a Chinese company who is completely controlled by communist China. And let's not kid ourselves. Communist Party has full control of any company that is going to be registered and doing business in China. And we now have a big problem. We have big monopolies controlling a lot of data, using AI, and now, communist China that is on the fence our country can actually manipulate the data, and we have a very ill-educated electorate. So I think it poses significant danger, and I'm glad that the House held the ground, and I hope the Senate will come through.
Well, what happens in the Senate, though? If it dies in the Senate, it's over, right?
Well, listen, I think the Senate will do whatever. If President Biden is serious, then the Senate will do it. That's going to be a task, but he's been very weak on China. The same how he exempted, he was President Biden from audit of inspections of audit in China. The same when he did recently when we passed the bill to delist Chinese company. He did a lot of agreements to punt this issue. So I think he's been very, very weak in China. So we're going to see if he's really honest about that. He will put pressure on the Senate for that bill to pass. But if it's not going to pass the Senate, it means that he's really just doing messaging and talking points. He's been done a lot, and unfortunately, that's why we have so many problems around the world.
Well, it's interesting because even as he agrees that there's national security issues for TikTok, he's on TikTok and he's doing videos to speak with young people. You say Biden is weak on China. What are your thoughts on that memorandum of understanding that he signed when he was vice president back in 2013, 2014, which allowed Chinese companies to list on U.S. exchanges but not follow the rules of every other publicly traded company, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission? Why would he allow all those Chinese stocks to trade on these exchanges and not follow the same rules as every other public company?
No, I actually was an auditor and quality control review at that time, and I was stunned to see that because we had so many operations, very risky, communist country, and we exempted from all of the country in the world, we exempted China. That totally didn't make sense to me. And that created a significant loophole. And now we've seen, even recently, that all audits failed miserably. And we have billions of our pension funds investing in some of these indices, which is really, they're not even audited. A lot of Americans don't even realize if you want to go, I'm a free enterprise person. If you want to go and invest in communist country and communist China, go ahead and do it. But don't do it. Don't force people that don't want to do it. So we definitely need to have more transparency on that. But what he did recently, even none of these companies were delisted. And PCOB is still punting this issue. And this is a serious, serious risk to our financial markets.
Yeah. Well, after offering to testify publicly for months, now Hunter Biden says he's not going to appear before the House Oversight Committee public hearing next week. His partners will. Tony Bobulinski said he will. He has agreed to testify publicly. But Hunter Biden has said he's not showing up next week. Your reaction?
Well, listen, that's not very surprising because ultimately he had a show, and during his testimony, and he was totally, when we did his deposition, he was totally reluctant to answer questions and had stories that really didn't make sense. But the matter is, you can see what's happening right now. Biden family been enriching themselves, being in the government. You have Vice President of the United States going telling Ukraine, oh, you need to fight corruption. But his son is making millions from one of the most corrupt Russian oligarchs. This is disgraceful, and it makes it look really stupid. I'll be honest with you. It's embarrassing for the United States to have situations like that. But they've been enriching the situation the same. You see the same what he just did with classified information that he was using to write a book and made millions in dollars. It's very consistent. consistent. But unfortunately, DOJ been so corrupt to cover them up, and they have a double standard. If they, if it is President Trump, they'll go and raid your house. But if it's Clinton or Biden, they got away with nothing. It's unfortunate reality of our politics right now.
Well, you say it's embarrassing. I mean, that's the least of it. Embarrassing. How about national security and the way it may be putting the country at risk? John Solomon at Just the News is reporting this morning that Hunter Biden and partners aided the Chinese bid to corner nuclear energy and the market for nuclear energy in the United States, according to memos. Are you looking at this at the Judiciary Committee? What is your evidence to tie Joe Biden to all of this?
Well, listen, I think we're looking at a lot of evidence, and the evidence is very clear. If Vice President at that time really didn't care about, when his son was doing all these businesses, why would he go and bring his business partners to meetings? If you have a son that has all of these problems, maybe you'll talk to him on Sunday night. But why would you show up, and bring extra to his business meetings? Why would you make calls during his business meetings? There is no other explanation unless you empower him to do the shady dealings, with a lot of oligarchs and communist countries, which poses serious national security risk. And now we have a president who could be compromised by foreign adversaries. It's a huge problem, and we need to get to it. And I think we're going to finish these investigations, and I hope they will not be taken politically, because it's not a political issue. It's a serious national security issue.
Meanwhile, let's talk quickly about the Robert Hur situation. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre declaring this case is closed. Former special counsel Robert Hur's testimony on President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. Hur revealed that Biden willfully retained the documents and even read out classified information to his ghostwriter. Congresswoman, you were in the hearing with Hur, and you focused on his decision to not charge President Biden. Here's a clip.
But it's interesting for me that when you talk about sympathetic, well-meaning older man with elderly man with a poor memory, it seems like every attorney would advise you to be sympathetic and be well-meaning. So is there something more than that? That just, I don't recall something for you to actually decide why didn't you pursue further the charges?
I think what you're asking about specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year. And of course, I did take into account not just the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color in real time of how the president presented himself during his interview.
So, Congresswoman, are you of the mind that he should have pressed charges?
Well, listen, these people are con artists. They're very good at presentations, but it's unfortunate what he did. I mean, one thing, yeah, he can claim that, Biden probably does have real serious memory problems, because he could even see from the recorded interviews of his ghostwriter. But he definitely understood his memory is not that bad not to understand he was retaining and disclosing classified information. That was very obvious. And for the Department of Justice not to press these charges and, special, prosecutor. So I think that is really unfortunate. Special counsel should have done that. But I'll tell you, Department of Justice been covered up. Now Biden and Clinton family for a very long time. They have a significant double standard and two-tier system of justice.
Yep.
And unfortunately, they didn't do it.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Congresswoman, thanks very much for being here. Victoria Spartz, good to talk with you. We'll keep watching your work.